Well, hello once again. Glad you're with us. I am your host, Mike Hingson, and you are listening to Unstoppable Mindset. Today, we have the opportunity to chat with a person who is a speaker and a certified leadership coach. And what I like best about Cartwright Morris is that what he says he does is to help equip young men and executives to live life as an adventure. And I've always felt that life needs to be lived as an adventure. We shouldn't really make it a drudge. There are always challenges. There are always fun things. You may not know what's coming next, but you know what? That's part of the adventure. So with that in mind, Cartwright, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. And thanks very much for being here.
Well, it's glad to be here, Michael. I'm excited to just be with you today.
Well, we're kind of glad you're here, and it's I think going to be fun. Lots to learn about, because I know you've been very much involved in helping people with sales and other kinds of things like that. And we'll get to all that, needless to say. But I'd like to start with hearing a little bit about maybe the earlier Cartwright, growing up and all that kind of stuff, where you're from, what you did, and any secrets that you don't want to tell, you can leave out. But the rest we'd love to hear about.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I'll always say I'm born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. I mean, sometimes I like to turn up my accent, especially if I talk to some people outside the South, kind of ham it up a little bit. But actually, I lived 3 years of my life in Canada. My dad was starting a branch of his family business up in Simcoe, Ontario, if anyone knows where that is. That's near kind of south of Toronto. It's kind of halfway between Toronto and Buffalo. So I got to experience a little snow in my life on a regular basis. And I grew up just, playing sports, loved sports, average student, average athlete. Generally, I could say my upbringing's pretty great. As you get older, you realize as a man, there's little things that we miss that I'm learning now as an adult and trying to correct and redeem and figure it out. But like I said, like you put in my intro about adventure, I think there's so many times as a kid, I always wanted to be grown up, wanted to be taken seriously. And now I feel like a lot of my 20s and 30s, I was going back to, man, the value of play, the value of adventure and discovery and curiosity is something that I wish I didn't diminish as a child, and now as an adult, trying to get back. So
when you lived in Toronto, did they teach you that apparently the appropriate way to say it is Toronto?
I was so young as a
My
kid.
Canadian friends tell me that.
Yeah, I had no idea that was the correct way to say it. I think we all just said it our Southern way. Yeah. Which is generally never the right way. I mean, I've got friends from Australia who are from Melbourne, and I always say Melbourne, and so I always get it wrong.
Yeah. Well, and of course, depending on where you're from and where you've lived and what you know, it's either Houston or Houston, depending on
right
whether you spend time in New York or down in Texas. And
yes,
I've not ever heard that somebody lynched somebody for saying Houston if they were down in Texas, but I'm sure that there is a lot of angst about that. But nevertheless, that's still what it is. In New York, it's Houston for whatever reason.
I remember being in New York, and I got corrected on that very quickly. It's Houston.
It's Houston,
not Houston.
And I don't know what the history of that is. I guess I should really go explore that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like in Massachusetts, it's not Worcester, it's Worcester. It's not even Worcester, it's Worcester.
It's so funny. Languages. It's funny. We all are separated by our common language in English, right? Depends on just where you are in the world.
Yeah. There's something to be said for all the accents. Of course, each place would say, well, we don't have an accent. You have the accent.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So there you go. Well, so where did you go to college?
So I went to college at a place called Auburn University, which is in Alabama. For those who may not know that, we in the South, we love our football, and Auburn is the little brother team, as people who follow college football. So I went to Auburn. bounced around degrees. I mean, I would say it's big part of my story, Michael, is struggling through school, trying to understand how to learn. Now I look back, there was probably lots of mental health related stuff that I didn't know how, but also just the not knowing my direction hurt me in college too. I think I bounced around. I mean, I went from business to different other history major to eventually settled on. I was like, oh, I'll just be a teacher and a coach. And I signed up for kinesiology classes when I was going to get into PE, be a PE teacher, phys ed. So that was what led me then there. And then I ended up getting a degree. I ended up leaving Auburn because I'm one of those people who it just took too long. It took a little more than 4 years to graduate. I guess I missed the snow. I kind of dropped out of college, went and lived in Park City, Utah. Was a ski bum for a season with some friends and had some fun. Enjoyed a little bit different way of living, and but eventually came home and really felt like I needed a degree. And that led to me actually transferring and going to another state school in Alabama called University of South Alabama, Mobile. And I transferred there and ended up getting my degree in about a year and a half. And and then that led me back to Birmingham, which I did not want to go back, but that led me back there. So
what did you get your degree in finally?
So health education.
Okay.
So I was still chasing that idea of, that's what I always say. I try to mentor guys more and more in the college. I don't know what, Michael, your thoughts on our modern education system. But there, now I look back, I'm like, I wish I took some time to kind of figure out more of what I want, because I really didn't know at 18.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm now understanding my personality, taking more personality tests, understanding my idea of flexibility and autonomy and my desire to be more adventurous. Being in a school system from an 8 to 5 job would have just drained me. And I probably would not be the best husband. I probably wouldn't be the best father. I wouldn't be the best employee because of just that understanding more of my personality. But that's what I thought. At the time I was, I thought football was the greatest thing ever, and I could help young men be a football coach. And to be a football coach, you got to start somewhere in a school system, and PE made sense because I like being active. And so, but now, thankfully, doors were shut and in that area, and my path kind of veered off, and which I'm very thankful for.
Well, you mentioned the modern education system. I think one of our biggest problems is that we do too much studying for the test and not studying to learn and be creative.
Yes.
And
100%.
I think that's the biggest issue, that we've somehow got to get away from that, because it shouldn't be all about tests. And if we're not really teaching people to think. I remember when I was a graduate student, our 1 year, our PhD qualifying exam for classical mechanics was administered by a postdoc who came from, I believe Dr. Price was from Berkeley. And he came down and taught well. He was a good teacher. And he created, as new faculty members are often forced, if they will say it, to create the PhD qualifying exam for classical mechanics. And one of the things that he did was he had a test of 20 questions, and the first 16 were all basically theoretical, philosophical, mostly conceptual questions, but not math related.
Right.
And the last 4 all dealt with math, Lagrangian dynamics, and other such things. And fewer people, I don't know whether anyone actually that year passed the test. And the faculty heads called him in and said, "What are you doing? Why did you create such a hard test?" And he said, "Hard test? Let me show you something." He pulled out his freshman classical mechanics test, and he said, this is the final I gave students at the end of the year. The only difference between that one and the qualifying exam was that the qualifying exam had the 4 math questions, which were all things that people learned kind of in junior or later, but not, or in graduate school, but not in freshman classical mechanics. The same initial 16 questions were on the test, and people didn't get them because they were expecting math and they were expecting a lot of stuff rather than really learning the concepts.
Yes. I think there's something too, just being problem solvers. There's too much of a linear thinking to education. And I think that's to your point with that test.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, they couldn't very well argue with him since he showed them what he did. But nevertheless, it's amazing that we miss so much in all that we do teaching concepts and basics, and oftentimes don't really teach youth to think.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely like a desire of what to think in a lot of different areas, but versus how to think, how to process, how to problem solve, how to think, how to take on challenges. I think that was something much of my first 25 years of life is I learned how to avoid challenge, hardship, struggle. And now later in life, I learning how to do that and just, self-discover. It's just so much, and become more self-aware has led to much more of my success than the other. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's important to do that. And I think we really need to teach children, youth to think. And I think when we honor teachers, a lot of times when we hear the teachers who get honored with one award or another, when we hear them talk, they do talk about how they're really dedicated to their students and helping the students really better themselves. And you don't hear them talking about, we just study for the test.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we always remember the teachers that did do that.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, their name, the names of, there's less than a handful that really challenged me to think versus, hey, do this, you get this. Yeah.
Maybe it was the time, but I think I had more teachers that really did do that rather than doing the test. But I'm talking about growing up in the 50s and in the 60s. And there was a lot more of that, and there was a lot less of the so-called standardized tests.
Right.
And so that probably helped. And I had some teachers that really dealt with philosophy. My freshman teacher, Mr. Wilson, my freshman English teacher in high school, I remember once he was talking about just ethics and philosophy, which had nothing to do with the English stuff that we were supposed to be learning. But he took a few minutes and he was talking about the fact that, if I owe somebody a quarter, I'm going to be bothered until I can pay them back the quarter that I owe them. And that's the way it should be, because if I make a commitment to borrow something and then pay it back, I better make sure that I do that. And I had a whole bunch of other teachers who were the same way. And I remember most all of my, even up through high school, teachers, and they all were that way. I really wish that we had more of that today rather than teachers being forced to do the things that they do. My niece is a kindergarten teacher, and she talks about all the crazy things that teachers have to do today that make absolutely no sense in terms of the whole educational system, because what are they really teaching the kids? Or she tries to teach her students things about reading and writing, even in kindergarten. I'm amazed at what they get to learn that we didn't get to learn, but still there are a lot of limitations put on them, which is very frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what's going to be the result in 10, 20, 30 years from now? Right.
And that's what's scary. Mm-hmm. So you eventually got out of college and you said doors were closed. So what happened?
So I left college and I was really excited about just possibilities of where I could move and where I could go and get a job, and didn't want to go back to my hometown, but a job opportunity came about in Birmingham, and it was in kind of fitness and training and mixed with some sales and getting people to this new facility in Birmingham. And I felt like it was like it was a way to get my foot in the door, maybe in the athletic space, in the training space. And eventually, that lasted about 6-7 months. And I realized this wasn't for me. Doing sales, you become very either self-aware or kind of not really reflective, the opposite. Navel gazing, I guess is the best way to say it. And I learned a lot about myself, and I needed to gain confidence in myself. I didn't need to address some insecurities. So I eventually then left that job and actually was like, I need to go find myself. I need to figure out who I am, and I need to not find it in my hometown where I felt like I was, sometimes that familiar. I don't know how, Michael, you're familiar with the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where he talks about getting away from the familiar. I think I needed that in my life. And so I literally moved to this ranch out in the middle of Northern California. It's straight up I-5 from where you are in Etna, close to Oregon. And really, I was 26. I didn't know anything, hardly knew anybody there. And, most of the people that are on staff are college students, 19, 20-year-olds. And here I was, this random 26-year-old coming in the middle of summer, and I was working maintenance. And it was the best thing I could ever want and need in that moment, where I could literally just show up, do my thing, get done at a certain hour, work hard, just kind of have everything in front of me and not have this ambiguous idea of the unknown, and really kind of just show up and really be accepted for just who I was, not who my parents were, not the idea of what I could be, how much money I made, who I knew. It was just kind of when you get in your hometown and that familiar, you can start projecting. I always say I was living in a lifestyle of outside in. I was constantly living my life through the eyes of other people. How can I be funny enough, seem smart enough, seem good enough, and project this idea and of who I thought I should be, or I thought my parents thought I should be, even though they weren't putting pressure on me to be a certain way. And I finally got away from all that, and we're in this place where people just didn't know me from Adam, and it was refreshing. They accepted me. I think I found community really for the first time in a long time, and I felt accepted. And it was kind of the beginning of where I am now, and it was kind of this just self-belief of, man, I am valuable. I do add to people's lives by the words I say and my actions, and articulating those things by just journaling, spending time alone, being around this community who, like I said, didn't know all my background and my history, what kind of high school athlete I was, or what kind of student I was in college. They just knew me for me and who I was showing them. And so that really set me up, I feel like, for where I am now. And that kind of got me in the right path.
What did that teach you, being out there?
Well, I think it really taught me how to view myself from an inside out approach. I love, Stephen Covey's talks a lot about that this belief, it's got everything, living our life and this conviction, starting from that of who I am and presenting that. And if it's not accepted, we don't get angry. We don't throw judgment. But we continually to discover and learn in any situations. And we can't, if it's like building that lifestyle from that place of inside out, and you really start living in truth. You start living in that place where you're not trying to be, you're not approaching life to be accepted. acceptance is beautiful. I think all human beings, we need that. We need that be unconditionally loved. But I think we need that in the context of, hey, let me bring myself to the table and not try to adjust according to the culture. I think I was a very good chameleon. I think I could perform and do little things just to fit in, just to be right, to make people laugh. And when you didn't have a positive response of me, I went into myself and beat myself up and judged myself. And I created a lifestyle where I think there's a lot low grade anxiety that I was dealing with that then led to me really not valuing what I had to bring others. And so I think really starting to live that inside out and valuing what I had to offer, I could really live in community holistically, and I could really add value, and I could then learn from my mistakes, from my failures, and not be be destroyed by them, because I was really just learning more about what was inside me. So
you started really gaining some self-confidence and learning self-worth.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how long were you at the ranch or in Etna?
So I was there for really 4 months. And then I came back and to my hometown, where this organization actually had a home base in Alabama. And so I continued to work with them on and off for the next 4 or 5 years, and was in California. They actually had part of the organization was in Israel, in the West Bank. I got to travel there and experience new cultures and be around just different people, and is exposed to living in California, where I met a lot of different people from different parts of the world, and really expanded my worldview and helped me really see, understand people. I think that's where I really started to become a student of people. I really got so fascinated by people, and just my natural curiosity through just being in the outdoors in California and out in the West, where as a kid, I used to love Westerns. I used to love mountains and adventure. And I got to kind of explore that, living out there and being out there. And, but then it really, and that other curiosity of just people, understanding people, where they come from, different backgrounds, where, I just, grew up in, Birmingham, Alabama, in the Bible Belt, where things were kind of necessarily always rigid, but it was definitely, I lived in kind of a bubble and an echo chamber, and I got to hear different perspectives and belief systems and worldviews. And it really helped me, if anything, just gain more empathy for others and understand their point of view, but also reinforce, what I believe and my convictions about this life and all that. And so it ended up being really fun. I always say, with the older you get, I think as a young man, I think you think everything about everything, and you got all these convictions. You become pretty dogmatic and rigid of what you think is right, and they're pretty broad. But the older you get, those things start shrinking, and you start having less and less. But those things that become less and less of your convictions, they become more real and true, and you can base so much of your life on. And you become everything else. You become pretty open to and honest, and it actually becomes more fun to be around others and talk about these certain issues that you used to be just so rigid on.
I hear you. And so you worked with that organization for a while, and then what did you do? You obviously left that at some point. Yeah.
So that led to me moving. I think this is a common theme in my life. I think this is that's why I resonate so much with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. It was, but I really felt when I was leaving that organization in the middle of 2015, I was like, I could go anywhere. I could do anything. I'm excited. And just don't send me back home. I don't want to be back in Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah.
And but it was interesting. This job opportunity opened up where it's interesting. My heart really went out. I had built all these life experiences. I had developed I felt like these coaching skills and these ability to really help men in business and in sales really go through the process that I went through in my 20s and, early 30s, to really help them apply some of these things in their business world. And I really felt a heart for the men that I knew in the city. And that's where my biggest network was. And so that really opened the door to work for this nonprofit organization here in Birmingham, Alabama, the Center for Executive Leadership. And it was, and it was just, man, the door kind of flung open, and I moved back here and worked for that organization for 6 years and really honed my skills, developed more of a business side, being in the nonprofit space, really helped me kind of figure out more and more of how do I actually add value to others? How do I really do this on a bigger scale than just, in my community, but actually do it in a way that's helping those who may not even know who I am. And so that's what eventually led me back to Birmingham. Yeah.
Well, and along the way, you also found a partner.
I did. It's funny. I was single for a long time, that's, going back to my story, what I said earlier, Michael, of just living outside in. And I think that's another reason why it led me to the ranch that I went to in California was you're in your mid-20s, and in the South, this is a very common thing, is people are getting married 22, 23 right out of college. And a lot of my friends were, and they're starting careers and building success and creating families and having kids. And, but for whatever reason, I couldn't find that person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And it became frustrating. You really do feel very exposed in a world where, everyone is married, and, any single person who resonates with that gets that. And it can be difficult. But the person I ended up finding, I wouldn't have traded for the world, and kind of came from a place where I didn't, I never thought it was a dating app, and so, and which is crazy story was, I am a few years older than my wife, and she had, Michael, I don't know if you know anything about these dating apps, which is funny. But it's, you have to put an age range, and she had her age range was like 28 to 34. And 2 weeks before my 36th birthday, she bumped it up to 28 to 35. And so I fit into that. And 2 weeks before my 36th birthday, and we met, and about a little over a year later, we were married. And man, and I couldn't imagine anybody else. And we're having a blast and loving life, and hoping to have a kid on the way soon. So yeah.
My wife and I got married later than most people, 32 and 33 years. And as we always said, and we lived together for 40 years until she passed last November. But what we both always said, and I still say, is we were old enough that we really knew what we wanted in a person. And it wasn't something that was arrogance or whatever, but it's just out of maturity. We knew what we thought would be the kind of person that we could get along with. And not from a dating app, but one day we were introduced by a common friend, and he and she and I and someone I was actually dating at the time went out to dinner, and I sat across from my future wife, not knowing that was going to be the case. And the other two were talking, and we just hit it off. And then my friend moved. And so Karen and the friend that we had in common were in touch, but he said, that I had, my friend had left, and suddenly I'm talking to Karen. This was in 1982. So I met her at the end of January, and by March we were talking some. And then I went to Hawaii with my parents in May of 82, and I was going to do some sales work over there. And I wanted to take them. They'd never been to Hawaii. And Karen was a travel agent. She did the ticketing and all that. And the bottom line is, I called her twice from Hawaii every day we were over there. And we were married in November of 1982.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah, as I said, we really knew what we wanted, or we thought we did. And I guess we were right because we hit it off. And we were married for 40 years until she passed. So it was really a good marriage. And you know what it's like now, being married now for a little more than a year. You know how you feed off each other and you enhance each other a lot.
Yeah. And I would say it, and what for me, what is interesting, you hear that's what's so, I think being part of a good group of men in your life and having that in your life, you hear the stories of their marriage life and you kind of go, okay, how would I handle that situation? And how would I want to be married to somebody who reacts in that way? And so that was like, to your point, I kind of understood more of what I wanted and was able to, even in the dating process, kind of, I don't want to say throw out like, testing, like it was an exam, but there was definitely moments where I wanted to see how she reacted in certain situations. And
I'm sure that went both ways.
Yeah, 100%. And really find out if am I marrying a mature person who values life, has the same interests as well as values. And that's what we found. And so, so it's, it's been fun. It's interesting. And it's never going to be perfect, but I think that's the joy, right?
Yeah.
When it's, you kind of figure it out together. So, and you want to be able to be with someone who is willing to do that. That's not just projecting some expectation onto you and is willing to kind of adjust and build and go from there.
And grow together.
Mm-hmm.
So you gained a lot of self-confidence. So what's the difference between confidence and arrogance? Because projecting confidence and truly being confident, I can see some people say, well, you're just arrogant.
See, I would say a lot of my life was trying to project myself as not being arrogant, but that's not necessarily confident either. I think that's I would say the big difference between arrogance and confidence is arrogance is really trying to hide an insecurity. There's something you're trying to give bravado. You're trying to give an image that is hiding something that you're afraid someone's going to find out. Where confidence is built on humility. You are 100% aware of what you're not. That you, maybe not 100%, but you are aware of what you're not, and you're okay with it. You're not trying to hide it. Like you are you know what you're good at. You're confident in that, and the things that you're not, you are willing to accept, to value that in other people. Where arrogant people, if there's something they're not good at, they will be territorial in a way to others who are good at it. They will feel insecure. They will feel a level of almost what's the word I'm looking, a scarcity mindset, where like you can't be good at that because I have to be known for that. Where confident people are good with other people that are good at what they do. And I think that's a lot of what confidence we have to really think about, that it's grounded in humility. And it's almost like holding two truths at once. When people are, go ahead, Michael.
And the other part about it is it's not just the issue of humility, but even if somebody is better at doing what you do, if you're a competent person, then you look at it from the standpoint of, wow, this guy's great, or this woman's great. What can I learn, and how do I learn to do some of those things? And do that from a humble and curious standpoint, rather than something where it's not humble, but rather, how do I show that person up?
Yes. Yeah. And that's where I think you go back to the outside in, the scarcity mindset versus a more holistic mindset of, hey, we're doing this all together. And I think that truly confident people like being around other confident people. Arrogant people don't like being around confident people.
Right.
They're threatened by them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you tell the difference? I think you're sort of alluding to it, but how do you tell the difference between someone who is truly self-confident and somebody who's just plain arrogant?
Yeah. Well, generally you can kind of get an idea on being around them. I just think, like, going back to I like the idea that just a lot of arrogant people, you could feel they're threatened by other people. There's a scarcity mindset. There's a insecurity. And I would say that we can all sense a difference between insecurity and humility, that there's a fear-based mindset. There is an anxiety in the atmosphere is probably the best word, versus a humble person. They're present, they're there, they're with you. It depends on a lot of the different situations, but you could just feel there's a level of maturity, a willingness to engage others versus protect yourself from others. And so I think just especially like in a business concept, or even in sale, like like someone in sales that's trying to present an image that they're not, versus someone who's just confident in being who they are where they're at. And I think that's that is generally can be summed up in my mind by just the presence, the way they act, whether one's fear-based versus one is presence-based.
I like what you just said about engaging yourself with others as opposed to protecting yourself from others. How true.
Mm-hmm. Yes, most of us, are very, it's really strange. And it takes a lot of hard work to get to that point, because I think a lot of us do grow in environments where my favorite quote of any movie, recent show, is Ted Lasso, where he talks about be curious, not judgmental, right? I think that mindset of, like, we immediately judge people that are different, and so we try to protect ourselves from them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we've got to get away from the whole idea of being judgmental. There's no value in it, really. And the other part about it, and I talk about trust a lot, is that it's like being open to trust. Mm. The difference between us and dogs is dogs generally are open to trust. They don't trust unconditionally. They do, I think, love unconditionally. I think it's in their nature. But they don't trust unconditionally, but they are open to trust unless something horrible has really happened to them. And the difference is we tend not to be, because we've been brought up in so many ways to think everybody's got their own agenda, and how can I trust this person? I'm not going to trust them. I'm going to build a wall, rather than exploring, is there a way I can develop a relationship and a trusting relationship with this person? And the answer is maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but you'll never know until you try, with the idea that you leave yourself open to the idea of trust, and either somebody will earn your trust or they won't. And likewise, you will earn their trust and they'll earn your trust, or that won't happen. And then that's a different story, but you've got to start somewhere.
100%. And I think you always got to be willing to ask those questions yourself. Why am I not willing to trust? It's a valuable thing, probably one of the most valuable things in this life. I think you're right. Like, we all generally should openly love others, but the desire to trust one another is built. But you have to start with the willingness of, like, hey, if I really want to be in relationship with this person, if I really want to build a business with someone or build a marriage, or there has to be some level of trust created. And what do I have to put aside to really build that?
How do we build confidence and create confidence for our lives?
How do we build confidence, create confidence? So I think it's going back to a little bit what I just said is, going back to my athletics background of, like, watching film, tape, right? That I would say the first thing that's the obvious is, you got to do hard things. You got to be willing to do hard things, whether that's by choice or hard things happen to you in life. Like that's going to happen. I mean, as you know, Michael, like these are the things that are going to build confidence. But to really gain confidence in your life, you have to, on a consistent basis, you have to learn to do hard things well. And how do we do hard things well? And I would say, like, it's going back to my athletics. Start with evaluating. How do I evaluate my thoughts and emotions on a regular basis? Like, how do I, any given situation, I would say any confident person, great leader, top performer I know has the ability to really do this at a high speed in their mind. When they go through something hard, they experience a negative emotion or a negative thought, they're able to process. They have a filter to which they see the world. This is going back to what we were talking about with trust. That generally, people that struggle to get trust, they have a filter of how they see the world, that everyone's out to get me, right? And I think sometimes we have to continue to evaluate our filter and process these things, because that's how, when we do hard things and we go through something negative, we're able to adjust. I would say that's what when I experienced a negative emotion, over 10 years ago, I would become, like I said, navel gazing. I would look inward. I would shut down. I would collapse, and I wasn't willing to, and I was trying to avoid those negative emotions versus like, I needed to evaluate it, understand my thoughts and feelings, what was going on to actually grow and learn. And so that's why I always say, start with evaluation. Then from there, that's clarifying your strengths and weaknesses. You really have to clarify. That's going back to the humility thing, learning to really know what you're good at and know what you're not. And I think that's a real confident person is very aware of both of those things. I would say that's a big part of my journey. I think some people hate personality tests, but to me, they've become really helpful because it's helped me understand myself and not feel that constant anxiety to try to be someone I'm not. And I think that's allowed me to be more confident, show up more and be myself. And then I think the last thing is really important, is I always like says, you got to learn to act boldly from what you've learned from evaluating, clarifying. I always say boldness is like courage's little brother. It's real intense, real fast, not really sure where he's going, but you got to be willing to act boldly. I think a lot of confidence follows those who are willing to act boldly, to be bold in their decision making, to see forward movement, or not focused on the results. I think we've hit on that a little bit, Michael, especially with like we talk about test taking, it becomes all about making the test. It is not about the process. I think people that are willing to be bold in the process, really not focused solely on the result. I think confident people really, they know good results are coming, so they're not focused on it because they know they can learn from failure. They can learn from hardship. They can learn from disappointment. They can learn from even pain and change. Like there's these constant things in our life that hard things are going to come, but when we're really willing to evaluating, clarifying, and then acting from them, we really can gain confidence in just about anything, whether that's in our relationships or at work, career, or just in life in general.
How do you define bold? You talk about acting boldly. What does that really mean?
It's just, I think boldness is really willing to just step outside your comfort zone. I'm trying to think who created it, but the whole idea of here's our comfort zone, then outside of it is growth, right? And then way outside of is panic. I think it's willing to step outside that comfort zone of your life, that here, you're not going to really gain confidence by being on the sideline, by being comfortable, by being safe, by doing things like you've always done it, or being like everybody else. I think bold people, confident people, they act boldly by doing something that's a little bit uncomfortable. That's a little bit unknown. That's why I always say life is, about adventure. I think we have to take that mindset, be willing to just kind of play a little bit, have a little fun. Michael, I think this is really interesting because I thought of this the other day because I watched the documentary, The Rescue, about the 13 boys in Thailand who got stuck in the cave.
Right.
and how, they had trained Thai Navy SEALs. They had these people, they're extremely disciplined, knew how to dive, trained. This is their area of expertise in their job, and they struggled to figure out how to find the boys and rescue the boys. And they needed these men who basically do this as a hobby to rescue these boys. Like, this is like what really allowed those boys to be rescued is where they realized is they needed the weekender cave diver, the guy who does this for fun, who is willing to go into dark caves wearing a mask and a snorkel, and who has navigated this for the fun of it. I think this is going back to what we said about adventure and play. Like, these people were willing in their free time and fun to do these crazy, uncomfortable things because of the curiosity, because of the adventure, because of the fun. And so that led to their expertise by just living life that way, doing something. And it allowed them to actually be experts in rescuing 13 boys that, was a story that spread all over the world. And now, I think there's a movie and a documentary about it. And I think that really, when it comes to defining boldness, it's just the willingness to step out of your comfort zone out of curiosity and the desire to be better, to explore, to even to the possibility of having fun. I think everything I've done is fun, is not all, has never really come out of my comfort zone.
Yeah. Well, the other part about all of that is that when you are like the weekend diver, they're also more relaxed.
Yeah.
They know more of what they're doing, or they go into it with a confidence as opposed to just a discipline like a SEAL diver or something like that, who may very well have good confidence, but the weekend diver who goes in there comes from a different point of view, and there's value for that.
Yes, 100%.
And, talking about the whole idea of leaders and leadership, I think that true leaders do have a lot more confidence and a lot less arrogance. And some of their confidence also helps them recognize maybe someone can do this particular job better than I, and I'm going to let them do that, because as the leader of the group, I'm responsible for the group being successful. And that means knowing other people's skills and recognizing when they may be able to take the lead and get the job done better, or help us all get the job done better.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the things that strikes me as a relevant question is, why is it important to find the right people to gain confidence? Because you can meet a lot of people, but some are going to teach you more and truly help you more than others. So when you're really looking at it, why is it important to find the right people, and how do we do that?
Yeah. I mean, that's, I would say that's probably a lot of people out there. Like, yeah, how do I find those people? That is the hard part, right? I think finding similar values and interests, similar like the way I was looking for in a wife. But I would say when we start acting boldly and we start really understanding more of ourselves through evaluating and clarifying, and then we act like, we need to be around the right people that reinforce all that's happening into us. I think that's the beauty of being in a great network, a good community, working in a healthy work environment, is when we start really gaining confidence, we got people going, all right, you're on the right track. I love in my, my men's cohort, my leadership cohort is really fun, because I always say I'm limited in my expertise, but also when you get a group of leaders on a Zoom call or in a room, and they start adding value to other people, and the other person goes, wow, that I needed to hear that, or that really resonated, or that really spoke to me. This person who gave it goes, oh, wow, maybe I am on the right track. I'm gaining confidence in my voice. I'm gaining confidence in my actions and even my thought process. And so I think it's hard to really gain confidence on an island. I think that's where, when we really see where we're adding value from all that we're doing on, internally and on the side, and understand going through these situations, doing hard things and understanding ourselves in it, and then acting more boldly from it, then getting the reinforcement from like I said, a community network or work environment really creates, helps us gain confidence. And I think also the other piece of it is really being challenged. I think that's something that's really helped me just grow, is just being around great people. I think you really or end up in silos of just poor thinking and little action. We end up saying the same. But when we get around people who are willing to work hard, do things differently, think differently, it automatically, by osmosis challenges us to do the same. And it's hard to stay the same. And you really have to go, all right, how do I level up here? How do I perform at a higher level? And I think that generally reinforces confidence. And sometimes, it happens that way.
I love the phrase you said, it's hard to find confidence on an island. Mm-hmm. We're all together, and we really can learn a lot more when we're around other people, even if they don't know they're teaching us. If we open our minds to being willing to be taught or shown, I do believe that we're our own best teachers, but we have to be open to learning. And so I love that phrase. It's hard to find confidence on an island. I think that's great, which is really pretty cool. Well, you have clearly demonstrated the value of life being an adventure in a lot of different ways. Do you still work with executive leadership, or are you out on your own now?
No, I started my own coaching business actually this time last year. Yeah. So I'm doing coaching executives and sales professionals here in Birmingham and some remotely, and been doing that for almost a year now. So,
well, tell us more about all that. What you do, what's the organization called, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so it's just J Cartwright Coaching. The J is my first name, and who I'm named after my dad and my granddad. So it's a little bit of a nod to them and their business acumen. But yeah, I've been my coaching program is 3 months. It's kind of, we go through that process of gaining confidence, and in my men's cohort. So beginning each month, we really talk through, a lot of these big issues, these kind of overarching content, but then we really start getting into, all right, how's this resonating with you? How do you really walk this through? And that's what we do I offer 2 coaching sessions in this coaching program, where we really start problem solving. All right, what are you going through? Because I always say, like, leading in sales, especially sales, like these are hard things to do. These are not easy. That's what I always say, like, to gain confidence, you got to do hard things. So to do it, but you got to learn how to do them well. And so really, how do I help you in the midst of some of the hard things you're doing in your job and even at home? And it's funny, Michael, we talked a little bit about marriage, and it's some of my clients, what ends up happening is they come in for professional and help and leader, in some of their managerial stuff, and we end up talking a lot about their marriage, which is funny. So, but yeah, that's a lot of, that's what I do. It's really just a men's cohort with coaching on a monthly basis. And then, really, yeah, I've created even just from that a keynote that I love to, speak to sales teams and help them out and create momentum and be a solution to problems in especially in the sales world, which is just not an easy, I would say it's not easy, but I'm someone who loves autonomy. It's probably the best career path you can take. So
how would you define success today?
That's what I say. It changes. I think that's where we all have to wake up every morning and go, all right, what does success look like today? I think sometimes, I mean, I keep coming back to my story, which I'm glad you got me to tell it, Michael. I would say I was a square peg trying to fit in a round hole. I just desperately wanted to be this line of success the rest of my life, show up, be this person and fit in, and everyone accepts me and feel successful. And I think that's a very poor way to define success. And I think success has to be defined by really kind of just growth. It has to, where every day, am I learning? Am I becoming a better person? Am I connecting with people? Am I learning about people, learning about becoming more self-aware, and perfecting, not necessarily even perfecting, because I think perfect can be miscued as well, but am I really growing in excellence in my craft?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, yeah. So I would say for the most part, it's subjective, but obviously it could change per year, it could change per month, it could change per day. But I think when really we learn how to define that for ourselves, to our unique personalities, our unique gifting, our unique even career path and interests, I think that's sometimes we just at a young age decide this is the only thing that's going to be successful, and we force it, and then wake up, in our middle age and feel angry, depressed, and disappointed with the life that we have. I think there's a reason why. It's because we've just been unwilling to adjust to define success according to really what the day holds. So,
a lot to be said for self-analysis on a daily basis, isn't there?
Absolutely. Reflection is so underrated.
Reflection is so underrated.
Yes. I would say a lot of great leaders that I know they have the ability to reflect really well.
You talk a lot about sales and salespeople. What kind of advantages do you think salespeople actually have in their personalities over the personalities of other professionals who are not salespeople?
Yeah. It's hard. It is, I think there is a desire to understand people. I think you almost got to be a expert at people to be really good at sales, because you're going to walk into any room and who you're selling to is going to be very different, resonate. If you try to come in and be big, gregarious person, which I think generally salespeople are, they kind of can be extroverted, real relational, have the ability to communicate at a high level, which are good things. But I think sometimes if we force those issues, or force ourselves it's just not always going to work for the same people. So I think really that learning to be a student of human beings and understand them and their needs. And really what I also is, obviously this is in any profession, is really in sales, you're trying to be, whether you're a business owner or even just working for a company in sales, you really have to be solution focused. How do I provide a solution for this person, for this company, for this business? Am I offering that? And that's where, I think many people I think every human being maybe has had a bad experience with the sales guy, where it felt salesy, pushy, gross, manipulative. But over here, like you can also be a salesperson that's really wanting to add value and solutions for that. And that really frees you up to show up and kind of be in a place where you're don't necessarily have to be all things, all people, or frees you up to go to the next person and go, hey, thank you for the time. And you continue to build a relationship and network, but you can kind of move on and really continue doing your job. You have to be resilient. I think that's another thing, Michael, as I'm talking here, is the willingness to deal with failure. I think there's a lot of jobs where failure, like as an engineer, oh my goodness. It was funny. I was on the driving range the other day, and I had a golf driving range, and somebody hit a bad shot on the driving range, and they turned to me and goes, every time I hit one of those, I'm just thankful I'm not in my operating room. It's like that mindset. Like failure's hard in a lot of other professions. Like being a surgeon or a engineer, where versus in sales, it's like you have to be, it's almost like a baseball player where, over a third of the time you're going to fail. And you have to be willing to kind of build that resilience, understand yourself, and, continue to gain confidence and be an expert in your craft and be more relational and solutional focused versus results and me focused.
I would say also that it isn't necessarily that a third of the time you fail. A third of the time it may not go the way you planned, but the other side of it is, how do you embrace that and how do you help the customer? I've had times that I've sold products or tried to sell products that would not work in my customer situations. And my bosses would regard those as failures. Why didn't you know it sooner? Well, there were strategies as to why, and maybe I couldn't possibly have. But the other side of it is, I could also tell my customers, this is what will work for you. And that has turned into successes later on because we build trust. Tell me about the concept of Men Are Forged.
So this was a podcast I started, and man, when was that? That was 3-4 years ago. Wow, it's crazy. And it's just the mindset that I had to take on. And a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, Michael, is the whole idea that life, we are forged in life, whether things happen to us or we choose to do something, that these are the things building us, shaping us, molding us. And we have to be willing to embrace that. The whole, forging, the definition of forge, right? It's obviously there's two definitions, right? There's like a forged check. There's the fraudulent that is trying to present yourself as something you're not. And then there's the forged as in being molded and shaped by heat and hammering, the hard things in life. And so that was where that concept kind of came from, the mindset that I wanted to really take on. I didn't want to be I was trying to present myself as something I was not, but I really wanted to embrace some of the more hard things. I avoided them for so long. And that led to really creating a podcast. How do I encourage other men to do this? Because I just saw this growing need that men had a similar mindset that I used to have of just kind of passively going through life. And I think it really comes down to a lot of this, Michael, and I don't know if you felt this in your upbringing, but I feel like less and less, and then maybe it's a Western culture thing of there's just less and less of a rite of passage for men. It's very passive. It's not direct. It's not a older man coming alongside you. And, we generally kind of have passive ways of looking at what manhood is now. And part of me wanted to really kind of start creating content around that. And that's kind of why I started the podcast and interviewing some of these leaders and men that I respect and admire and kind of get some of their wisdom in a lot of these areas.
Well, I think the whole idea of the decreasing rite of passage also comes from the standpoint of we're not encouraging people to interact with each other. We're not encouraging people to have the tough or the relevant conversations. And so it does happen. Well, I've got to ask, do you ever deal with coaching women? I mean, our women are forged.
Yeah. Oh, and I agree. I'm just one of those people. If you want to build a bridge, you got to start on your side, right?
That's true. Just checking.
I mean, I don't have any million coaching clients at the time, but I do coach women. I am one of those people where I'm like, I don't want to mansplain some of these concepts. And I empathize with the man. Right. And so that's why I chose Men Are Forged. And
that's
so,
fair.
but it's definitely, it's very true for all people.
Is the podcast still going on?
It is. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So people can find you wherever podcasts are made available. Well, that is cool. Well, if people want to reach out to you and learn about coaching that you do and maybe see there are ways you can help them and so on, how do they do that?
So you can go to menareforged.com or cartwright-morris.com. And
Cartwright and Morris are spelled.
Cartwright, CARTWRIGHT Morris, MORRIS.com.
Okay.
And I mean, they're the same thing. It's, either one. And so you really, I would say go there, get on my email list. And when you sign up for my email list, you get a video, a little bit of about what I do, and we can start a conversation from there. That's probably the best way. But when you find out more content about me, you're welcome to, find me and reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Well, I hope people will do that. And I think that you've offered a lot of really relevant, interesting, and poignant things for all of us to think about. And I hope that people will reach out to you and get a chance to know you better. And I certainly have enjoyed this and our previous conversation and want to do more of it. So we definitely need to stay in touch. And of course, if there's ever any way we can be of help to you, you just let me know.
Thank you, Michael. This was a blast coming on.